Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to go ahead. We're going to wait a couple minutes to get started here as people filter into the Zoom room. Thanks for joining us. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to wait one more minute as people are still entering the Zoom, and we will start in just a little bit. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started now. My name is Bryce Kuhn, and I am the Director of Education with EarthDay.org, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to day 2 of the webinar series, Connecting People, Planet, and Prosperity, the webinar series for Earth Week 2025. So just a reminder that this is a week-long webinar series. I know some of you, I recognize a few names from yesterday's webinar, so thank you for coming back if you joined us yesterday. Today, the topic is going to be on education and biodiversity. And if you're interested in continuing this learning, we're going to have health and biodiversity on Thursday. And then on Friday, the last of the series will be climate, cities, and biodiversity. So we're hoping that you join us throughout the week if you are available. So first, just a few Zoom guidelines for everyone. If you're having any problems with your audio, just be sure to check your audio settings, which are on the lower left of your Zoom screen. The chat is available, but the chat only goes to the panelists. So if you type something in the chat, I'll be able to see that, and the 4 panelists will be able to see that, but it's not open. It's not going to share with everyone who is in the webinar. And if you have a question that you would like to ask, we're going to ask that you use the Q&A function, not the chat. If you use the chat, that's okay, we'll see it. But if you have a question throughout the Zoom, please put it in the question and answer, and we will have time at the end of the webinar to answer these questions. And as we go through the webinar, if you have a question for a panelist, please go ahead and put that question in during their presentation. So you don't have to hold on to your question till the very end and you might forget it. Just go ahead and put that question in, and I will record that question and then ask it during the Q&A session. For those who are hearing impaired, there is a closed caption function in the Zoom toolbar. And for this, we wanted to mention that the recording of this Zoom will be available in English and in French. Before we get started, we'd like to do a land acknowledgement for all the places that we come from. In this, the contributing partners of the webinar series work and reside coast to coast in Canada, as well as in the United States. We wish to acknowledge our presence on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who have called this land home since time immemorial. We are committed to working together in the spirit of collaboration, reconciliation, and change. Today, we're going to hear from 4 amazing panelists: Catherine Collin from Vanier College and the Campus Biodiversity Network, Mike Bingley, who's the Director of Education with Canadian Wildlife Federation, Maria Amparo Godoy, the Global Lead Student for Decarbonize, and Cheryl Charles, IUCN Commission on Education and Communications Steering Committee from the Steering Committee and the International Co-Chair for Nature for All. So a great lineup of panelists. Before we get started, before we go to the panelists, I'm going to share just a little bit about why we're having this webinar series and a little bit of background on Earth Day and some of the education work that my organization, earthday.org, has done. If you were on the webinar yesterday, apologies. This will be pretty familiar, but promises it will be shorter, okay? So thinking back to the beginnings of Earth Day, there was an awareness about the environment that was starting to come about, especially after Rachel Carson published her bestseller, Silent Spring, looking at the links between pollution and our health. And the first Earth Day was supported by Senator Gaylord Nelson, and along with a conservation-minded Republican Congressman, Pete McCloskey. And the idea was to harness the energy that was on college campuses around the anti-war movement and to use that energy towards protecting our environment and asking for change. There was a student lead on this because obviously, when we're talking about teach-ins and we're talking about activating for change, it's so important to have the youth voice, which I'm very excited we have a youth voice on today's panel as well. Dennis Hayes was the young activist who helped organize the Earth Day events around campuses. So he hired 85 staff to promote this, and in the United States, 10% of the population, or 20 million people, participated in the first Earth Day. So such an amazing event to have 10% of the population activate for this. And since then, Earth Day has grown into an international movement, recognized, participated in by 1 billion people. I also want to point out that the first Earth Day was around teach-ins. So today the topic is around education, and that is really in line with the theme of the first Earth Day, which was around teach-ins on campuses. So the connection between Earth Day and protecting our environment and education has always been there. At earthday.org, we identify a theme each year, and this year our theme is Our Power, Our Planet. So a focus on the importance of renewable energy and also empowering people to take action. We also believe that education is key for recognizing Earth Day and for protecting our environment. And we have climate education work we do that is founded on 3 principles around climate mental well-being. So addressing the eco-anxiety that many young people are feeling, developing a green muscle memory, or this idea of behaviors that you don't even think about, but finding behaviors that are green or environmentally friendly. And lastly, encouraging climate solutions. So having young people think about jobs that are in the green economy that they may be interested in, or inventions an innovation that is going to help us decrease our carbon emissions. This year, we had schools participate in something called the Earth Day Showcase, in which schools organized events around plastics, renewable energy, or fast fashion or food prints, and did a culminating project in either their school, their classroom, their school, or in the broader community. And teachers are now sending in their examples of their showcase, and we are going to highlight them on our website or on our Instagram, Earth Day Educators. So if you're interested in seeing any of those, we would love for you to check them out. So again, Earth Day all the way back to 1970. By 1990, Earth Day is becoming this global event, mobilizing 200 million people, reaching 1 billion people by 2010. In 2020, Earth Day turns 50, which means Earth Day turned 55 yesterday. And 2025 and beyond, we are now writing the future of what Earth Day is and can be. And one of the things we're doing for that is all gathering today to hear from our panelists, ask them questions, and learn more about education and biodiversity this week. So that's a little bit of background about what we're going to be discussing today. And I would like to introduce our first panelist, Mike Bingley, the Director of Education with Canadian Wildlife Federation. Mike, go ahead.
Thanks, Bryce. Yeah, um, as you mentioned, I'm the director of education at CWF. I've been in this field for about the past 30 odd years, working across Canada with a team of wonderful educators. And I always, if we can go to the next slide, and I'll go a little bit quick through the first few here. I always like talking a little bit about how it is that I came to do this work. And the first thing is that I was really lucky that I had parents that liked the outdoors. So they'd take me outside on a regular basis. Um, um, they'd take me down to the local park down the street from where we lived. When I was a teenager, which is the next slide, I was able to explore Canada with my friends. I was in Scouts. Well, I'm still technically a Scout leader. So I spent a lot of time visiting some pretty interesting places. This is Silver Peak in Killarney Provincial Park in Ontario. When I got a little bit older, um, I went on and I worked as a canoe guide for a couple summers. That's the next slide. And it was really just an excuse to explore a little bit more, spend a few summers out in the bush. This is one of my favorite photos of this. Just as an aside, if you look carefully, you'll see that canoe's half filled up with water. I had totally screwed up, and I thought to myself, at least no one will ever see this. And I looked up when somebody was taking that picture. Um, the next slide. Um, Now I'm lucky enough to be able to explore Canada with my own kids. And um, if we go to the next slide here, that this tapestry of experiences over an entire lifetime is really vital for real care for the environment. And it's not something where we can say we've solved it because we're concentrating on any one age group. Now, there's a lot of research that shows that you can get away with, um, well, if you spend time with kids before the age of 6, that's the greatest predictor of conservation ethic over a lifetime. But if you don't have the whole tapestry, if you don't figure out all the various pieces of it, um, you're going to have kids who do something and then they get distracted by things along the way. I've seen some research that shows you can get away with making sure that kids have deep nature experiences up to about the age of 13, knowing that many will come back as adults. But if you want to make sure that this is a lifelong ethic, and I think we all want to make sure that that's what we're going to do, you need to make sure that all of us have repeated experiences of nature at every stage of life. Um, and I'm not somebody who's going to say, hey, kids, get off my lawn. I've been doing this a long time, but I don't think that's helpful. But I will say that there's some things that used to happen naturally just because there weren't as many options. If you go to the next slide here. Now, one of the biggest gaps that I see in nature education is when we get into high school. It's pretty easy for an elementary or middle school generalist teacher to include nature in their curriculum without thinking very laterally. And so there's lots of elementary school teachers, lots of middle school teachers who will just sort of slip in nature along the way because it can sort of fit into the curriculum a little bit. It gets a lot harder in high school because the subjects have become more specialized. And that used to be okay because life would fill in the gaps. Um, and I think about these things a little bit because I know that if you teach subjects outdoors, you teach subjects through the environment, they have a real impact. Um, I'm still in touch with my high school physics teacher. The only lesson I remember my high school physics teacher teaching us is when he was teaching us about electrons moving and he took us outside. I'm the proud holder of a 50% in grade 12 physics. So I wasn't the best physics student, but I remember that lesson like it was yesterday. And one of the challenges that we have is if we sort of think about how society has moved on, um, and not doesn't there aren't as many opportunities for kids just to go outside. So the world has moved on from many opportunities for somebody to try a lot of different activities to one where about the time you're 12, you have to specialize. So in 1990, 90% of youth hockey leagues were house leagues where somebody could just drop in once a week and play. Now only 10% are. The rest are rep leagues where a kid needs to play 3, 4, 5 days a week plus tournaments. The same is true with a whole bunch of youth sports, also in arts activities like dance. School-based outdoor clubs are declining. So they were just as ubiquitous in high schools for a long time as sports were. But now they're getting more and more rare. And there's bright spots, of course, like Flin Flon High School in Manitoba has a program where all kids grades 9 through 12 get to spend time outdoors. And they do that because A, they're close to nature. Flin Flon, of course, is in northern Manitoba. But they also know it has a real impact on learning. Now, the final thing is the rise of instant private communication, which is available widely, which quite frankly means that teenagers can talk to their friends without their parents bugging them, and they don't need to go outside to get some privacy. Um, Teenagers are social animals. So they used to have no choice but to go outside if they wanted to talk to their friends without their parents looking over their shoulders. Well, quite frankly, my son's home from school right now. He's upstairs chatting with his friends at lunch on his phone. I'm not an anti-technology guy. I love technology actually. But when that opportunity is there that didn't used to be there, it means that um, there's less sort of natural opportunities for people to go outside than there used to be. If we can go to the next slide there. Now, the biggest part of a child's life is in school, and schools are going to need to change a little bit. That happens all the time. This is a picture of the high school I went to. It's not actually the building I went to. The high school I went to burned down twice, was rebuilt, was torn down, and moved, and is now in its fourth or fifth building. And that means that that school had to change a lot over time. And that's going to require a little bit lateral thinking. But most subjects of parts that can be taught outside. I talked about physics teachers, but the reality is that we know that mathematics are taught better outdoors. We know that English is taught outdoors. I've saw some phenomenal history lessons over the years where they've taken kids out to areas and taught about the history of the natural world in a place where the natural world is existing. So that those things can totally be taught outside. We just need to think a little bit laterally about it. If we can go to the next slide. But we also need to realize that the average teacher is pulled into a million different directions these days, from diverse class compositions to tech to meetings. And so it's going to take time. And it can't be framed as something that's one more thing that we're going to dump on teachers. We need to frame this in a way that we're talking about this as something that's going to make teachers' lives easier, because it is going to make their lives easier. We know that the reason why you've got high school English teachers who are football coaches isn't because they love football. In some cases they are, but they're doing that because they get to know the students better. We know that the same sort of things happen when teachers are taking kids outside, either through clubs, either through activities, either through their classrooms. And we also know that it ties directly to literacy, numeracy, any other number of student success measures. And we need to make sure that we help teachers do that. At the same time, we need to socialize this with parents. So teachers aren't spending an inordinate amount of their time talking to the parents about the weird things that they're doing now. We've all heard the stories about new math. A lot of teachers are teaching math in different ways because, quite frankly, it's working better and kids are learning math better. But they're spending a huge amount of time talking to parents who are complaining and talking to society that's complaining. Here in Alberta, where I live, the new curriculum was spent a bunch of time talking about, well, we need to get back to basics and just teach math through the algorithm, without paying attention to the fact that Alberta had the highest math scores on PISA in the world at the point where they did that. The way that they were doing things worked, but nobody had the teachers' backs. We need to make sure, if we're going to start doing this thing, that we're going to spend a lot of time talking to society, talking about how this isn't a weird way of doing education. It's the best way to do education. And it's one more tool that we can get into the hands of people. We got one more slide here. I like to think of this as an unfinished quilt. We've done a lot of work, but we've still got a lot more to do. At CWF, we weave our programs and advocacy around this quilt with the goal of creating a nature literate society of individuals working to make sure that our wildlife and habitat are protected for the use and enjoyment of all. Last year, we reached over 200,000 people with direct face-to-face conversations about nature. No, those are things where we get to have conversations with people. And the reality is the world needs a lot more of this to happen. Our goal is that we want to have 25% of Canadians have the opportunity to have real world experiential activities in nature by 2028. And that means that we got to all work together to do this. The world needs a lot more of this, and it just isn't a solar endeavor. We're going to get a lot farther if we tell others about what we're up to and build everyone else up as well. And I'm really excited to see how all of us can work together to make this happen. I think that there's huge things that we could do when we do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate those points. I really liked how you framed that conversation by bringing in some of your personal experiences, bringing in some of your childhood on that. And as a former high school teacher myself, I taught for 11 years. Those challenges that you're talking about definitely hit home, but that just tells us why it's so important for all of us to do everything we can to develop these pathways for young people to get outside. And I think it's a great transition to our next speaker, Catherine Collin from Vanier College and the Campus Biodiversity Network, who will share with us about her work that ties to getting young people outside. Catherine, I think you're muted. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. And thank you for that inspiring talk too, that segues really nicely. I would like to speak to you today about the higher education sector for what we are doing at Vanier College, but also the collective impact. So what you will see is an example of an initiative called the Campus Biodiversity Network. But I beg you to keep in mind that this is with the goal of sharing and this collective influence that we can have across the curriculums and the way that we can come together to make our biodiversity observations throughout the higher education sector. So the Campus Biodiversity Network, I'm joining you from Montreal, Quebec. I should say that this is the traditional unceded territory of the Kanen'kehá:ka Nation, referred to as Tiohtià:ke. So it's a Quebec initiative. Aussi, s'il y a des gens qui parlent en français, vous pouvez me poser les questions en français. I promised I would slip a word in French. If anybody has questions in French, don't hesitate to write them in French. So it's a Quebec-based initiative, but it is open to all universities, colleges, and institutes around the world. And right now, we have about 70 institutions across the world that are part of this initiative. Very broadly, ways in which we see higher education institutions working to address biodiversity loss, these are varied approaches. We have campus grounds management, for example, pollinator gardens, rewilding initiatives, ecological restoration. We have more and more biodiversity strategic plans that are being issued alongside institutional sustainability policy. We have biodiversity monitoring and baseline assessments and bioblitzes, and that's where the Campus Biodiversity Network really shines and comes through. And then importantly, we also have more and more attention being paid to responsible purchasing and our institutional impacts of biodiversity through suppliers' codes of conduct and procurement. And we see initiatives like that, say, in the nature positive universities movement with which we work and are affiliated as well. So what this initiative looks at is trying to get students of all disciplines, of all aptitudes, and of all backgrounds in terms of nature. I too grew up camping and as a kind of nature obsessed little girl, but my specialty is very much literature, so not in the environmental sciences. students, trying to get as many people as possible out and making observations on our campuses. And rather than encouraging students to have a sense of needing to go far to get in nature, we are trying to use our own campus green spaces as ways to promote different approaches to nature and to have people have simply a 5-minute, 10-minute connection with nature. There are certain principles that I'll just review very briefly. One is that urban patches, where a lot of our higher educational institutions are located, urban patches and small-scale green spaces have ecological value. Research bears this out. Recent research is even showing that our campus green spaces may have more taxonomic diversity than other park and green space environments in those urban centers. We also hold to the idea that community can be engaged through our institutions when biodiversity information is not kept behind closed archives and internal structures, but is shared with the community. And the idea as well of empowering people to believe that they can generate high quality biodiversity data, even if they do not have expertise, which we'll see through these wonderful participatory science platforms. Most importantly, we hold to the idea that getting people out in nature, and this echoes what Mike has just shared with us, getting people out into nature, students with their educators out into nature, creates pro-environmental attitudes. And it's very simply the premise that we want to protect what we love. I'm sure, I think Cheryl later in the panel will also be talking about health benefits, but we know that there are significant benefits to our students when they have access to nature, specifically for the demographic that I'm speaking about. So we're talking college, institute, two-year colleges, universities, that demographic of age of students. So lowered stress and anxiety. We have increased critical reasoning and creativity. Importantly, an improved sense of community cohesion. People who look at nature together tend to bond together, even if they don't know each other. And then finally, that sense of awe that we know to be physiologically important. And then to echo what Bryce had mentioned before, small gestures of getting students out to observe biodiversity in small bite-light moments is actually one of the ways that we can look at mitigating our climate anxiety. We know that small, regular, impactful actions make a difference in attenuating some of that climate anxiety. So, we are, as I mentioned, I'm speaking to you from Montreal. So we are on a heat island. This is the heat map of the island of Montreal. And we'll see that where my college is located, it is on 50 hectares shared with another higher education institution down the street. And it really constitutes this little oasis of green space. So we know that preserving and promoting green space and promoting biodiversity observation is something that can be beneficial to the health, not only of our students, but for those people who are in the immediate neighborhood of our institutions. We operate with several different approaches. We have individual observations of students going out onto campus on their own in non-structured ways, just using participatory science applications to make observations. We have campus-wide collective observations, which we're going to be having this week with campus bioblitzes. We have inter-campus observations as well, where we have a type of friendly leaderboard between campuses to see who can observe the most species and make the most biodiversity observations. And then we have specific projects that are set up for faculty who want to have a biodiversity profile of a given course. And we see that through these participatory science tools. The primary tool that we use is iNaturalist, the Canadian iNaturalist, which of course the Canadian Wildlife Federation manages. We also use eBird, and we also use Mission Monarch, which is an initiative through the Space for Life in Montreal. It's very easy. So it's this 1, 2, 3, 4 step process that students respond to very well. Anybody, it's at the disposition of anyone. The idea behind this is, of course, we behind the scenes have created geolocated maps, if you like, that are uploaded so that anybody can go out with the application. They don't need to know that there's this project. They just use the app, and all of those observations are then tallied for our campus spaces. And we have students who have designed the banners for the projects. We do not have moose in the middle of Montreal. We have a field station, so just to reassure people. But we get this wonderful snapshot of the biodiversity that we have on our campus, and we do see that endangered species and threatened species are part of our campus profile, and that's simply from making some of these observations in a very quick and easy way. Students respond very powerfully to the notion that these non-structured, seemingly incidental biodiversity observations are contributing to research, and we know that the observations that are made on iNaturalist, when they reach a certain level of validation, are transmitted to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And unbeknownst to us, there was a study that was done looking at butterfly sampling sufficiency on the island of Montreal, and we see that Vanier College appeared in that data that was pulled from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility thanks to the observations that students had made on campus. So there is an impact that our students can see, and we also have this impact in terms of our collective snapshot for biodiversity. So these are just a few of the campuses and the leaderboards internationally for the project that we've created. We of course see California, University of California, Los Angeles has considerably more engagement around biodiversity, which is perhaps not surprising given the climate there. But we do see that McGill is close, and that's Montreal. Collectively, you see the snapshots that we have, and I'm sorry, I haven't updated it. We're close to reaching the 200,000 mark. Hopefully this weekend, we're in the 190,000 for global observations. But these are just biodiversity observations that have been taken on higher education institution campuses. And so we see for Quebec, these are not small numbers. So we see 4,000, over 4,000 species in the province of Quebec. We see close to 6,000 in Canada as a whole. And of course, globally, those numbers are high as well, 12,000 and climbing. To finish quickly, what we find is that when students start to make these biodiversity observations, first of all, they may be introduced to biodiversity observations in the context of a course or say a structured BioBlitz, as we are in the process of having on campus this week for Earth Week. But we soon see that students will become ambassadors for biodiversity observations in our neighboring areas. So we're very lucky where I teach in Montreal to have a 250-hectare complex of wetlands, and we will see students get out and share with others their newfound love and knowledge of observing biodiversity, tracking invasive species, etc. I will just slip in a word to say that we have found the City Nature Challenge, which is organized internationally by the California Academy of Sciences and the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, but in Canada by the Canadian Wildlife Federation. We found these BioBlitzes annually at the end of April around Earth Week to be some of the most powerful ways of engaging our students in making biodiversity observations. And we share these projects with everyone. So we are helping to host the project for Greater Montreal. We have the country-specific project that is run by the Canadian Wildlife Federation, and the worldwide City Nature project. So we encourage everyone to get involved and to help make that connection with nature, even if there's a lack of dedicated expertise around environmental science or biology, that all students are capable of not only getting their nature fix, but also of making a difference for international research on biodiversity. Please reach out if there's any interest. If you have an institution that would like to join, or if you'd just like more information, I am very happy to stay in contact. Thank you. I hope that wasn't too rushed for you, Bryce. Yeah.
No, that was great, Catherine. I really appreciate that. And all the images that you had on your slides, those were great. Great to see students outside participating. I also really liked the connection between Mike's presentation and your presentation, Catherine. Mike talking a lot about, needing to get students outside and how do we get them outside? And then also the connection with technology. Technology in a lot of ways is deters young people from going out into nature. But there are tools, iNaturalist being one of them, that is very friendly and can help get young people outside. I looked at Catherine's slides the other day, and I re-downloaded iNaturalist, and I
Good.
also have a friend we do a lot of cleanups, and with students, one of the, I wouldn't say concerns, but it's like, what if you kind of finish a cleanup of a space early? And I think it's just a great idea to say, all right, well, let's download the iNaturalist app or have it on a phone and participate in something like this. So thank you again, Catherine.
No problem.
And again, great to see young people out there participating with nature, learning about our environment. And that segues nicely into Amparo Godoy, who's going to share some of her work as a climate lead for Decarbonize. Thank you, Amparo.
Hi. Okay. Hello, I'm Amparo Godoy. I'm 16 years old and I come from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm here to talk about the importance of climate education in children and in schools. My voice does not represent only myself, but also the thousands of young people that are part of the Decarbonize program. I've been actively involved in environmental initiatives since I joined the Decarbonize program back in 2021. However, my interest in the environment began much earlier, in kindergarten, when older students visited our classroom to teach us about recycling. That early experience showed me the power of climate education, especially when introduced at a young age. That's why I believe that it's essential to start educating children about climate issues as early as possible. I am also a student at the Global School, an innovative institution that encourages us to grow and truly listens to our ideas and projects. Thanks to this supportive environment and through the Decarbonize program, we've been able to carry out numerous initiatives focused on climate education. At my school, we connect learning with real action through different environmental projects. One of our most beloved initiatives is our vegetable garden. Students take classes there and learn how to take care of our plants, understand the seasons, and work with nature. We even produced our own compost using organic waste from the school canteen, and then we use it to nourish the soil in the garden. It's a small but meaningful way to show how sustainability works in everyday life. Another major effort was improving our school's waste management. It all started after noticing that all the classroom trash cans were constantly overflowing. After investigating, we found out that most of the waste came from the school canteen and their single-use polystyrene containers. So we decided to change them and replace them with reusable containers. This simple change made a big difference. And then we went further and implemented a waste segregation system, organizing bins for different types of waste and partnering with a local collector to ensure proper disposal. As I mentioned before, we believe raising awareness from a young age is essential. That's why we organize school-wide activities on Earth Day and World Oceans Day with special emphasis on kindergarten. For example, we adapt climate education through stories about endangered species. These stories help children understand how to take care for the planet in simple ways, like saving water or separating waste. And for older students, we hosted the first ever Extreme Hangout event in a school setting. It brought together not only our classmates, but also students from neighboring schools. This was a chance to explore more advanced topics from climate solutions to ecosystem restoration. Environmental experts came to share their experiences, showing us the real-world impact of their work. It was truly inspiring to learn from people who are actively making a difference. Having climate and nature education programs is essential because they allow us as students to connect what we learn with the real world. They show us that sustainability isn't just something we read about, it's something we can live through projects, storytelling, and taking action in our schools and communities. We need this kind of education to shape a future that is more just, healthy, and safe for everyone. Programs like Decarbonize help us understand how environmental, cultural, and social issues are all interconnected. Decarbonize is the world's largest child-authored climate education program coordinated by the Center for Global Education. It brings together young people from every corner of the globe to share their stories, learn from each other, and raise their voices for a better future. These children are more than students. They are climate change leaders. growing change makers, storytellers, action takers, and global citizens. The program spans in 6 continents, more than 75 countries, over 100 schools, more than 40,000 students, and more than 100,000 hours of collaboration. When I speak today, I do not speak alone. My voice carries the hopes and fears of children from Costa Rica, Madagascar, South Korea, Australia, among many others. Through Decarbonize, we all have a voice, and together, that voice is powerful. Each year, our work culminates in the Global Child Climate Manifesto, a document that captures the concerns, ideas, and dreams of youth around the world. In 2023, it was co-authored by 146 student leaders from 42 countries through virtual classrooms and cross-cultural dialogue. Then we presented at COP, when we make sure that the negotiators consider children in their decisions. I had the opportunity to represent my country and decarbonize at the Blue Zone of COP28 at Dubai. Although my school does pay attention to climate change, it is an exception. In a survey distributed by Decarbonize to every student at every school that is part of the program, only 10% of the participants describe their climate education as perfect. According to the Decarbonize Manifesto, climate education should begin early and be accessible to all. It empowers us with critical thinking and problem-solving skills that are crucial to face the climate crisis. Many students express their concerns through emotional texts. This shows that the lack of climate education is a worldwide problem. For example, Jasmine from Philippines said that education undoubtedly allows the youth to be aware and knowledgeable enough to perceive the reality of climate change they are facing. Education helps teenagers open their eyes, stand up, and initiate an individual effort that eventually becomes a collective movement. All this empowers them to have a purpose as a youth, to have a voice, and to act now. When we are given the opportunity to participate, we become part of the solution, not just learners, but agents of change. We've seen that when students are given the tools, the knowledge, and the space to take action, incredible things can happen. From composting in a school garden to presenting a global manifesto at COP, climate education transforms us, and it turns concern into courage and learning into leadership. But we can't do this alone. We need more schools, more teachers, and more communities to join us, because this isn't just about one school or one student, it's about all of us. So remember, climate education is the first step towards saving our planet. It opens our eyes, it ignites our voices, and most importantly, it equips us to build a more sustainable, fair, and hopeful future. And when children speak up for the planet, the world has no choice but to listen. Let's make sure every child, everywhere, gets that chance. The planet can't wait, and neither can we. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Amparo. That was very powerful. Really appreciated your perspective there and those quotes from students about the importance of incorporating youth voice in decision making, seeing that with your work with Decarbonize. And then also I'm familiar with the work of CGE and the climate manifesto and the bringing those demands to COP. It's always really powerful to read those. So thank you so much, Amparo, for sharing that. That was excellent. Our next panelist, Cheryl Charles, is going to share some updates in this world of environmental and climate and nature education. Cheryl is a member of the IUCN CEC Steering Committee and the International Co-Chair for Nature for All. Thank you, Cheryl.
Let me see if you can, I think I'm getting there, in order for you to see this screen. Is it full yet or not?
Not yet. I think you need to hit the present button, but
let me see if I can do that. And my apologies as I try to get that done. I think that works now. Tell me if that's right. Are we set, Bryce?
Go to the display settings real quick up top, and then
okay.
Yep, and then just switch it, and then we should be. Good to go.
Swap presenter. Now, does that work?
Perfect. Thank you, Cheryl.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. So, we heard Mike start us in childhood, and you just heard Amparo stressing the importance of children. All of us have really emphasized that moment when we create those experiences and they become a part of the fabric of our everyday lives. That those emotional connections starting in childhood are really what lead to a lifestyle of taking action to care for the earth. So what I'm going to do now is shift to kind of the whole planet and what we can do at this critical time. And I'm going to focus on one organization that is stepping up to help make positive change at this time. And that's the International Union for Conservation of Nature. For those who don't know it, it's an old organization in the sense that it was created in 1948. Its primary mission is really to conserve the biodiversity, the species, the habitats of the planet. And it's unique in that it too is large, with membership from more than 170 countries, over 1,600. Members are organizations, they're institutional members, and then there are thousands and thousands of volunteers. So you can see that more than 17,000 people are participants or members of one of 7 commissions. You heard it mentioned that I'm on the steering committee for the Commission on Education and Communication. So IUCN as an organization has been committed to education really from the earliest days. The Commission on Education and Communication was actually the first commission that was established. As the years have progressed, education, experiential education, meaningful environment education, all of that has been a theme with IUCN. But at this point in time, as we just heard stress the importance of climate education, the need to have people throughout the world directly engage in care for the living earth has never been more important. And so our theme today in this particular webinar is really to make that connection between education and biodiversity, that connection between education and care for the earth. So IUCN is stressing the concept of what we're referring to now as nature-based education, but really that includes any number of different aspects of that, where you hear of it talked, whether it's outdoor learning or, again, environment education or conservation education. There are a host of names for it. The names don't matter as much as really the importance of meaningfully connecting people with the natural world in their everyday lives, starting from the youngest of ages. But IUCN specifically, and through the Commission on Education and Communication, has created a new task force on nature-based education specifically. And that task force has a number of working groups, from how do we build a worldwide movement to what's the research that underlies all of this that makes the compelling case for what we can do and how we can do it. So I just show you that list of the areas in which working groups are focused right now, with a host of tangible products that we'll be delivering to the IUCN, to the International Union for Conservation of Nature's World Conservation Congress, to be held in October of this year in Abu Dhabi, in the United Arab Emirates. Moving ahead, I made reference to this, but think about biodiversity education, nature-based education, all of these different aspects, including indigenous perspectives, even aspects of social and emotional learning, definitely experiential learning, all these dimensions of learning that connect people, again, in meaningful ways with learning and interpreting what they've learned in a way that leads them to make responsible actions. It can be done in a variety of different ways. We're offering this perspective to say that we're not substituting for other ways of engaging people meaningfully, but we are using the framework of nature-based education as one way to remind us that we humans are not separate from nature. We are nature ourselves. And so we're creating these series of emphases to make sure that there are a variety of ways for people to engage. But I want to stress again that it needs to be direct, meaningful experience, that knowledge alone won't make the difference. We can't tell people to care for the earth. We have to create the opportunities for people to fall in love with it, and to do so in meaningful ways so that we can each make informed decisions and take responsible action to care for the earth for the long term here. And again, at a time never more critical. One other dimension of what's going on internationally, I just want to bring to your attention that with the Convention on Biological Diversity and the regular meetings of what are called the Conference of the Parties, you hear about COP28 or COP16, you hear these references, and they're all about the Conference of the Parties, nations and peoples from throughout the world coming together to take action to care for the earth. One of the most recent, that held in Montreal just a couple of years ago, led to calls for a global plan of action for education on biodiversity. So again, the theme of what we're focused on today in this webinar. That global plan of action is in development. The IUCN is taking an active role, working with UNESCO and obviously with the Convention on Biological Diversity and with other partners. And so a prototype, a sample plan is in development and will be shared at upcoming events, again, throughout the world. So these are just aspects of what is going on internationally. You know, it takes lots and lots of people, all of us on this in this particular webinar, those of you who are listening, those of you who might talk to and with others about it. There really never has been a more urgent time, as we all know, to come together to care for the earth, for all of its living systems, for the individual species, and for its ecosystems, and for the planet as a whole. So we invite your participation. You can learn more about Nature for All by going to the Nature for All website, and you can certainly join the Commission on Education and Communication with IUCN. And with that, thanks to all my panelists, and thank you, Bryce, for convening this today. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Joe, for that. Really appreciate your insights on that. And as a member of the Nature-Based Education Task Force, it's great to see this work shared here today. And yeah, just another plug for the IUCN CEC, the Commission on Education and Communications, that is a it's free to join. So if you just go online and search for it, you could join that as well and get the education updates that Cheryl was talking about. So at this point, if I can ask all the panelists to come back, turn your cameras on. And if anybody, I have a few questions here, but if anybody has additional questions, if you could go ahead and put them in the Q&A, we will try our best to get to all the questions. But I would like to start with our first panelist and go back to Mike Bingley. Mike, you'd mentioned how high schools need to do more. Do you see this as sort of a wholesale change, district-wide, province-wide, or do you see this as more incremental or teacher-based? Could you share on that?
Well, you know, it's an interesting question. So I think that there's a couple of different pieces of it. The first one is when I look at the curriculums across the country, biodiversity is in virtually every curriculum in the country right now. It tends to be the thing that's at the end of the year, and it tends to be the thing that gets dropped off at the end of the year. So it's like, okay, we got to the end of June, and I was planning on taking the kids outside because it's going to be sunny. Well, I'm not going to, we run out of time. We have to do math. I don't know. So I don't think it's a curriculum problem. I do think that there's a pedagogy problem. So we need to make sure that teachers have the ability to do this work, and to do it in a cross-curricular way. There's some great examples of that going on around the country. Like I mentioned the thing in Flin Flon. There's a wonderful program that is happening in Peterborough, Ontario, where it's an integrated curriculum course across 4 subjects for a semester. neat things like that are happening, but teachers need to have the ability to know how to bring the curriculum into nature in ways that make sense. At the system level, we need to make sure it's easier for them to do that. So we need to make sure that when you've got a great teacher that's doing something like this, that they're not getting massive pushback from the systems. So when they're not getting their principal saying, "Why are you doing that now?" And they're not getting, quite frankly, the next Minister of Education in any province standing up and saying, "Well, we're going to stop that silly stuff." Like that sort of thing happens all the time in education, and quite frankly, we need to get the systems, which includes the teachers associations, on board if we're going to make this actually work.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for sharing that. It's interesting you talked about it being at the end of the curriculum and sort of, dropped off, and it reminded me of something I was going to ask Catherine, and also something that Catherine shared, which was just kind of having a different background. My background was in the social studies. So when I taught economics and psychology, and in high school for electives, kind of, geared towards them. And either my teachers were dropping off biodiversity, or I was just not paying attention, which is a very real possibility. But it means that it wasn't being hit on. There's certain things that are hit enough in school that you walk away with an understanding of that, whether you're always paying attention or not. And so it made me wonder, Catherine, with the using this program and talking about biodiversity, is there any, have you found like the need for prepping students, providing a background on what this is? Do you have students who are like, I had never heard of biodiversity before? Could you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, sure. So coming at it from the non-expert disciplines is really interesting. I think what we often find is that there are students who have been immersed in nature and love nature, who are kind of hiding in the wings. It's not their specialty necessarily, but they kind of come out of the woodwork, so to speak, when we have initiatives like that. So there's certainly, the goal of participatory science tools like this, and the collective snapshot that we get, which is really the strength of the program beyond the tools themselves. We want to make sure that we're generating high quality data, that we're not just putting an application in students' hands and then saying, go, press a button however many times. We want to make sure that we're both affording a moment for that connection with nature and generating high quality scientific data. And so, of course, there are some ground rules that we will review with students. I work in tandem with the Environmental and Wildlife Management Program and with geography profs and with biologists as well, to ensure that we're kind of framing our students' approach to nature in a way that is responsible for the generation of that data. But I do think gatekeeping is a real problem. I think it's a problem for teachers as well as for students, where teachers feel like they do not have the expertise or background in it. And so how can I incorporate it into something that's not my field of expertise? What we have seen, even just this week, for example, this afternoon, there was a presentation of an English teacher who was teaching to a primarily a science group of students, teaching how to use haiku as a form of observation of nature. And this was offset by biologists who are also teaching at the same time how to observe nature. So a multifaceted approach to that observation. What we see is that the teachers need the nature fix too. So students are getting that moment of connection with nature, but teachers come out revitalized and inspired by each other, and having this kind of connection across disciplines that otherwise would be very bureaucratic and difficult to move forward. So that's a kind of jumbled answer to the fact that, yes, you have to have some ground rules for ensuring high quality data in these situations, but nature really is for all, I think, as Cheryl's presentation showed.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I like that. It's very similar to the work that I do in climate education for teachers, incorporating it into different subjects, and this kind of fear of, I don't know enough, and I don't know everything about carbon molecules, so how could I teach it in my classes? And realizing, you can step back from that and like really approach it from your disciplinary area, and and also learn with your students. But I understand that, I think back on my teaching and teaching economics, and I did not teach about climate as much as I wish I had. And I never talked about biodiversity, which there's so many opportunities in an economics class, to discuss that. But hopefully there's teachers listening today and other people in education, and we can encourage that. And Paro, I'd like to hear your opinion on, I was thinking of the survey that you shared about what percentage of the students are receiving, great climate education or perfect climate education. And I'd be curious if you could share your perspective on what makes great climate education, what makes perfect climate education, and then also, to you, maybe the importance of teaching about it across disciplines or subjects, as Catherine was kind of discussing as well.
Okay, so in my opinion, good climate education should adapt to like the audience. So for example, in elementary school or kindergarten, you can teach like scientific data. So maybe make it more approachable, like with stories or with things they can relate to, and teach them like solutions they can do in their everyday life, like saving water or segregating waste. But then older students, the problem is that you might not get their attention because they're not like prone to pay attention to classes basically. So maybe like catch their attention with data and scientific like facts about how much climate issues are affecting us, and that may like get their attention and make them pay attention to all that you have to say and make them want to act and act on climate. And I think it should be across all disciplines and subjects, because well, it doesn't only affect I don't know, natural sciences. It affects everything because the world is being impacted by climate issues now.
Thank you so much for that, Amparo. I really appreciate you joining us and sharing your perspective. It's a great answer to that question. And I'm going to ask a question for Cheryl, but I do want to remind the audience that if you have any other questions, to put it in the Q&A, and we'll try and answer all your questions. Cheryl, I think one of the graphics that I liked the most in your presentation, and I saw it before once with the work with the Nature-Based Education Task Force, is the tree for nature-based education. And there's all these different branches coming off of there, and there's greening schools, greening communities, maybe there's stuff about climate education, teacher training, indigenous wisdom. There's all these different branches. And one of the things in that task force is that most people are coming to the task force probably very specific, focused on one of those branches. That's my experience, at least. I'm very focused on climate education, and that's kind of my branch. So I'm curious, in your experience, how important is it to bring those branches together? What strategies have you found, have you seen for bringing those branches together to really enact, comprehensive nature education?
It's a great question. One of the ways that I actually guide my own work and my own life is to look to nature itself. I look for what I call the natural guides. And I'll start with one, that diversity tends to be an indicator of a healthy ecosystem. So if we have diverse approaches to getting people engaged in learning and taking action to care for the earth, that's healthy. And then another aspect of how the nature itself, natural world, works is that it tends to work collaboratively. Yes, there's competition, but the big picture is that everything works together. That's how it coheres. That's how we have community. And so I want people not to think in terms of those various branches as being competitive. They all fit together. They create a healthy ecosystem. And so let's realize that any place or part through which we connect has value. And that everybody has a contribution to make. That's another of the natural guides that I work with. That's the idea of niche, that everyone has a role to play. Everybody has a contribution to make. There are a couple of other points I wanted to make really quickly. I think there's a question about, how we can help teachers, and there are a tremendous number of resources out there. I mean, certainly just an enormous number, just even do a Google search, but certainly Nature for All of the website has lots and lots of great resources and materials. The Children in Nature Network, which I founded with Richard Loeb and others, has great resources that you can go to. But the point I wanted to make also is we in this webinar have stressed the importance of engaging people from the earliest of ages. I want to make it clear that we can get engaged and fall in love with the natural world at any age. It's just that if we get children involved, they will tend to be taking action to care for the earth throughout their lives. So if we don't do that, we miss a lot of people, but give up on no one. Anyone at any age can get meaningfully involved and make a positive difference.
Thank you for that, and thank you for bringing attention to those resources. There was a question in the chat about resources, so Cheryl just shared some. Curious if we could have any of our other panelists share any resources that you either have and could share, or sources that you like to go to.
So first off, Aaron, who asked the question, I'm fairly certain that you teach on Christian Island, which it happens to be where my family has their cottage. So I've spent a lot of time in that part of the world. And the first thing I'd offer is get in touch with me. I'd be happy to chat with you about some things that you could do in that part of the world that would be really impactful. In more general terms, there's a huge amount of different programs that are out there that do training on that. So things like Project Wild and Project Learning Tree, that Cheryl helped found those things, those courses. Project Wild is a program that CWF runs in Canada. Project Learning Tree, they do stuff through the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. There's some phenomenal stuff that's being done out of U of T around the Natural Curiosity program that they've been doing. And just a huge amount of resources as well with the Association for Experiential Education as well. The second chunk that's worthwhile looking at in Canada is looking at the stuff that Take Me Outside is doing. Colin and that group are just doing amazing work, bringing inspiring teachers to take kids outside and giving some training around that. And then the last piece I'll just mention is that the work, there is some great work being done on a national environmental learning framework, that it's going to be the first of its kind in Canada that should be giving a lot of supports, especially around teacher training to educators across the country, which is kind of a neat sort of new thing that's coming on. And there'll be more information about that coming out in the fall from Environment and Climate Change Canada.
All right, thanks, Mike. Thanks for sharing that. It looks like you were right with your with Christian Island there in the chat, which I was familiar with from the Gordon Lightfoot song. So kind of if you're familiar with that. Catherine, do you have any resources you could share?
Yeah, just very quickly, I would say that so at the campusbiodiversitynetwork.org, we have a toolkit that was founded to be bilingual. Sometimes bilingual resources are not always easy to find, and so that's in the process of that's available. But I would also just steer people as well towards iNaturalist.ca and also the CWF generally for some of their really great plug and play kind of postcards and snapshots that are printable and easy to get people on the right track for making high quality biodiversity observations if you're using those participatory science tools. So those tools like iNaturalist through iNaturalist.ca, eBird as well, and some of the other platforms like Mission Monarch, well, Journey North is more American than Canadian, but I think they have a lot of great resources within the participatory science tools themselves. I would draw people.
All right, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, we always appreciate hearing of many resources as possible. We don't have a ton of time left, but Empire, I was hoping you'd give it's a big question, but maybe a quick answer to, there's a lot of people here who, work in education NGOs. What advice do you have for us on how to amplify youth voices? So what could you share with us?
Well, the main thing I would advise, it's like to just make sure and pay attention when students show interest in issues like this, and like make sure to give them the space to grow and the space to canalize their feelings and concerns and make action with that. Like listen to their ideas, their concerns, and just be there for them to express and to take action.
All right, thank you for sharing that, Amparo, and thank you again for joining with us today and sharing your perspective. So just a quick couple things before we leave here. I want to say thank you to everyone who came today, the audience. We really appreciate you joining us. And I want to thank the panelists for taking the time to join us and share their amazing presentations and perspectives. If you enjoyed this webinar, we have 2 more this week. Tomorrow will be again on health and biodiversity, and then Friday will be climate, cities, and biodiversity. So 2 more webinars that I'm looking forward to kind of round out Earth Week and the learning of this week. A thank you to our partners. You can see that this is bringing together a lot of different groups, a lot of different perspectives. So it's excellent to bring everyone together. And one more time, thank you to our panelists. Your presentations were fantastic, and I learned a lot, and I know that the audience did as well. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of Earth Week, everyone. Bye.